When Mobutu fell, he took everything with him. The palaces, the money, the protection. But the women he left behind, nobody talked about them. 3 wives, dozens of concubines, children hidden across 3 continents. After one of Africa's most powerful regimes collapsed overnight, these women went from marble palaces and unlimited wealth to something far more dangerous: invisibility. This is what happened to the women Mobutu left behind. At the height of his power, Mobutu Sese Seko did not just rule a country, he owned it. Every road, every river, every diamond pulled from the ground, every dollar that moved through the economy passed through his hands first. He renamed the entire nation after himself. The Democratic Republic of Congo became Zaire, and Zaire belonged to Mobutu. But what most people never saw was what happened behind the palace walls. Because inside those walls lived a world within a world of women. Mobutu's personal life was as complex as his political empire. He had 3 primary women: an official first wife, a second wife elevated to first lady, and a shadow wife living just steps away in the same palace. Beyond those 3, there were concubines, mistresses, women rewarded with luxury villas and European shopping accounts just for being part of his inner circle. Together, these women produced at least 16 acknowledged children. Historians believe the real number was significantly higher. This was not just a family, it was a dynasty. And at the center of it all was Gbadolite, a small town in the northwest of Zaire that Mobutu transformed into something the world had never seen in Central Africa. He built palaces, multiple ones, marble floors imported from Europe, air conditioning systems powerful enough to cool entire city blocks, a runway long enough to land the Concorde, which he actually chartered for shopping trips to Paris. The people living inside those walls wanted for nothing. The women closest to Mobutu had access to wealth that most Zairians could not even imagine. Silk, jewelry, private flights, personal staff, security details that followed them everywhere. They were untouchable. But here is what power does. It makes people believe it will last forever. The women inside Gbadolite's marble walls had no reason to think any of this would end. Mobutu had been in power since 1965. He had survived assassination attempts, international pressure, economic collapse, and global criticism. He always survived, until he didn't. In 1997, a rebel army led by Laurent Désiré Kabila swept across Zaire in a matter of months. City after city fell. The military that was supposed to protect Mobutu's empire dissolved almost overnight. And suddenly, the most powerful man in Central Africa was running. The palaces were abandoned. The staff disappeared. The security details vanished. And the women who had built their entire lives inside that world were left with a single question. What now? The answer was different for each of them. And for some, it was far more complicated than anyone knew. Starting with the woman who was there before any of the palaces existed. The woman who knew Mobutu before the power, before the money, before the empire, his first wife, before the palaces, before the leopard skin hat, before the name that made an entire continent nervous. There was just a young man from a small town, trying to figure out his place in the world. And beside him was Marie-Antoinette Gombe. They met in the late 1950s. Congo was still under Belgian colonial rule, but change was coming. Independence movements were gaining momentum across Africa, and a young Mobutu was positioning himself carefully. He was working as a journalist, writing articles, building contacts, learning how power moved between people. Marie-Antoinette was not a political figure. She was not from a powerful family. Their connection was personal, not strategic. They married around 1958. At that point, nobody knew who Mobutu would become. 2 years later, Congo gained independence from Belgium in 1960, and Mobutu's rise began almost immediately. He moved from journalism into the military, then into politics. By 1965, he had seized power in a coup and declared himself the leader of the nation. Marie-Antoinette went from being the wife of a journalist to the first lady of an entire country, almost overnight. Together they built what became the most recognized branch of the Mobutu family. 8 to 9 children. The exact number is debated, but historians largely agree on that range. Among the most well-known were Konga Mobutu and Kongulu Mobutu, who later held positions of influence within the regime. As First Lady, Marie-Antoinette carried herself with a dignity that stood in sharp contrast to the increasingly excessive world around her. She was reserved, quiet. She stayed away from political controversy. While Mobutu was building an image of absolute power and excess, she maintained a more grounded presence. But the palace walls were hiding something. As Mobutu's power grew, so did his appetite. For control, for influence, for women. He began having relationships outside the marriage, not quietly or discreetly. These were open secrets within the inner circle. Ministers knew, generals knew, the palace staff knew, Marie-Antoinette knew. But she stayed. She continued her role as First Lady. She raised their children. She appeared at state functions. She endured it with silence. Whether that silence was strength or resignation, nobody outside the palace walls ever truly knew. Then in 1977, everything changed. Marie-Antoinette died unexpectedly. The official cause was illness. She was not old. She was not expected to go. And by all accounts, Mobutu was shaken in a way that few had ever seen. He was a man who had mastered the art of showing nothing. Decades of political survival had made him unreadable. But at Marie-Antoinette's funeral, something cracked. Those who were there described a man who was visibly, genuinely grieving. She was buried in Gbadolite, the town he had transformed into his personal kingdom. In some ways, burying her there was the most personal thing he ever did with that place. Her death did more than remove a wife from the picture. It removed the last anchor of his early life, before the power, before the excess, before Zaire. Marie-Antoinette was the one person who had known him as just a man. After 1977, that version of Mobutu was gone too. His personal life fragmented. The relationships became less formal, more transactional. The family structure that Marie-Antoinette had held together began to loosen. And into that space stepped two women, identical in appearance, impossible to separate, and both completely devoted to the most powerful man in Central Africa. In the mid-1970s, two sisters arrived in Mobutu's world. They were from Equateur province, the same region Mobutu himself came from. That alone gave them a connection to him that most people in the palace could never claim. Their names were Bobi and Cosia Ladawa, and they were identical twins. Mobutu met them while Marie-Antoinette was still alive. The relationship that developed was not simple. It never is when twins are involved. Mobutu was reportedly captivated by both women. Not one, both. And rather than choose, he didn't. Both sisters entered his inner circle. Both became part of his private world. Both stayed. This arrangement was an open secret inside the palace. Everyone knew. Nobody said anything. Because nobody said anything about what Mobutu did. When Marie-Antoinette died in 1977, the dynamic shifted. The official wife was gone. The position of First Lady was vacant. Bobi and Cosia were both still there. But Mobutu could only officially elevate one of them. For 3 years, the situation remained informal. Mobutu ruled. The twins stayed close. And the world outside the palace walls had no idea what was happening inside them. Then came an event that forced his hand. Pope John Paul II was coming to Zaire. This was not a small visit. Zaire had one of the largest Catholic populations in Africa. The Pope's arrival was a historic moment for the country. And Mobutu had a problem. For years, he had been promoting a campaign called Authenticité, a movement designed to strip away Western and colonial influences from Zairean society. He had renamed cities, replaced European names with African ones, even changed his own name from Joseph Désiré Mobutu to Mobutu Sese Seko. But now the leader of the Catholic Church was coming to his country, and Mobutu was living with a mistress. 2 of them, in fact. The solution was swift and calculated. On May 1, 1980, just days before the Pope's arrival, Mobutu married Bobi Ladawa, both a civil ceremony and a Catholic religious rite. Bobi became the official First Lady of Zaire. The timing was not romantic. It was political survival dressed in wedding clothes. Together, Mobutu and Bobi had 4 children. Nzanga Mobutu, the most publicly known of the 4, who later pursued a political career in the Democratic Republic of Congo after his father's fall. Giala Mobutu, who also entered Congolese politics and led the family's political party in later years. Toku Mobutu, a daughter who remained largely outside the public eye. Ndokula Mobutu, a daughter who has lived quietly in exile since 1997. 4 children. 4 very different paths after the fall. As First Lady, Bobi handled the official duties, state functions, diplomatic appearances, public ceremonies. She was the face of the household that the world was allowed to see. But just behind that face, still inside the same palace, was her twin sister. Cosia never left, and Mobutu never asked her to. For years this arrangement held, Bobi in the official role, Cosia in the shadows, Mobutu moving between both worlds as if it were completely natural, because for him it was. Then 1997 arrived, and nothing was natural anymore. As Laurent Désiré Kabila's rebel forces swept through Zaire, the golden world of the Mobutu family collapsed in real time. City after city fell, the military retreated, loyalists disappeared. Mobutu, already weakened by advanced prostate cancer, could not fight back. The family fled Gbadolite for the last time. There were no ceremonial goodbyes, no organized departure, just a frantic exit from a palace that would never be theirs again. They moved through several countries, Togo, then Morocco. Mobutu's health deteriorated rapidly. On September 7, 1997, in a military hospital in Rabat, Morocco, Mobutu Sese Seko died. Bobi Ladawa was with him. The woman who had been elevated to First Lady through a politically calculated wedding was now a widow in a foreign country, with no empire left to preside over. In the years since, Bobi has lived between Morocco, Portugal, and Belgium. She has never remarried. She has given no major public interviews. She remains the official widow of the man who once called himself the Sun King of Africa, and she is still keeping his secrets. But she is not keeping them alone, because her sister is still right beside her. And Cosia's story is even stranger than Bobi's. Imagine living your entire life one step behind your twin sister. Same face, same voice, same background, but a completely different role. That was Cosia Ladawa's reality for nearly 2 decades inside the most powerful household in Central Africa. When the Ladawa twins entered Mobutu's world in the mid-1970s, nobody could have predicted how the arrangement would settle. Mobutu was captivated by both women, that much was clear. But when pressure came to formalize his domestic life ahead of the Pope's 1980 visit, a choice had to be made. Bobi became the official wife. Cosia became something harder to define. Not a mistress in the traditional sense. Not an official wife. Something in between. Something that only existed because Mobutu had enough power to make it exist. She stayed in the palace. She remained in his life. And she continued her relationship with him as if the wedding had never happened. The palace arrangement was unusual by any standard. Bobi handled the public functions. She was the face the world saw at diplomatic events and state ceremonies. Cosia occupied the more private spaces. She was present in the family settings, in the quieter corners of Gbadolite that cameras never reached. The 2 sisters reportedly maintained a functional relationship throughout this arrangement. Whether by necessity or genuine closeness, they coexisted inside the same walls, sharing the same man, raising their children in the same compound. Cosia bore Mobutu 3 children. Amani Mobutu, a son who grew up within the elite circles of Zaire, but was kept far from the political machinery compared to his half-brothers. Yalitho Mobutu, a daughter who experienced the full luxury of palace life in the 1980s and early 1990s. Tende Mobutu, a 3rd child who has maintained almost complete anonymity since the regime collapsed. Unlike the children of Marie-Antoinette, who held military and cabinet positions within the state, Cosia's children were kept further from the levers of power. They had the wealth, they had the privilege, but they did not have the political roles. That distance from politics may have actually protected them. When 1997 came and the regime fell, those with the highest political profiles faced the most scrutiny. Cosia's children faded into the background almost seamlessly. The collapse came fast for everyone in that household. As Kabila's forces closed in on Kinshasa, the family moved together, not separately. Together, Bobi and Cosia left Gbadolite side by side. They traveled through the same countries, settled in the same places. And when Mobutu died in that Rabat hospital room in September 1997, both sisters were part of the grief that followed. Cosia did not give a statement after his death. She did not appear in newspapers or documentaries. She simply continued existing. Today she lives in Morocco and Portugal, still in close proximity to her twin sister Bobi. After everything, the two women who shared a man, a palace, and a dynasty now share a quiet exile. What they talk about behind closed doors, what they remember, what they know, none of that has ever been made public. And there are people who believe what they know could still change the historical record of what happened inside Zaire. But so far, the twins have said nothing. They are not the only ones staying silent. Because beyond the three primary women in Mobutu's life, there was an entire hidden network of women and children that the world was never meant to know about. And what happened to them after 1997 is perhaps the most unresolved part of this entire story. 3 Wives was the official story. The real story was much larger. Mobutu operated with a simple belief. He controlled Zaire, and everything in Zaire was his. That included the women. Beyond his primary relationships, Mobutu maintained a wide network of concubines and mistresses, women from prominent Zairean families, foreign nationals who moved through the high society circles of Kinshasa and Gbadolite, women who were rewarded for their proximity to power. The rewards were not small: luxury villas, Mercedes-Benz vehicles, high-limit accounts at European boutiques, monthly stipends that would have seemed impossible to the average Zairean living outside the palace gates. But some of these relationships were not just personal. They were political weapons. Mobutu was known to pursue affairs with the wives of his own cabinet ministers and military generals. This was not accidental. It was calculated. If a minister knew that Mobutu had crossed the most personal boundary possible with his family, that minister was not going to plot a coup. The humiliation was the point. Loyalty through shame. It was one of the most effective tools in his arsenal and one of the least discussed. From these many relationships came children. Exactly how many is impossible to verify. The official count of acknowledged children from his primary relationships sits at around 16. But historians and former associates who worked closely with the regime estimate that Mobutu fathered at least 5 to 10 additional children through these unofficial relationships. These children were rarely acknowledged publicly. They did not appear in state propaganda. They were not given the titles of princes or princesses of Zaire. But they were not abandoned either. Many were quietly supported with monthly financial arrangements. Some were sent to elite boarding schools in Belgium, Switzerland, and France. Given good educations, comfortable lives, and new surnames that created distance between them and their father's legacy. After 1997, these children made a collective and largely unspoken decision: stay invisible. Most remained in Europe, living under different names, avoiding any connection to the Mobutu dynasty that might attract attention, legal scrutiny, or questions about frozen assets. Mobutu's fortune, estimated at billions during his rule, became one of the most contested financial legacies in African history after his fall. Various governments moved to freeze accounts and recover funds. The hidden children wanted no part of that fight, so they disappeared into ordinary European life. Some are believed to still be there today, living in France, Belgium, and Switzerland, working normal jobs, raising families of their own. Children of one of the most powerful men in African history, living as if that history never touched them. And that is perhaps the most revealing detail of this entire story. Not the palaces, not the political marriages, not the twin arrangement inside Gbadolite's marble walls. It is the silence. Every woman in Mobutu's life chose silence after the fall. The official wives, the shadow wife, the concubines, the hidden children, all of them went quiet. Which raises one final question. What exactly are they still protecting? Bobi Ladawa has never given a full account of what happened inside those palaces. Neither has Cosia. Neither have the children. Somewhere in Morocco, 2 identical women who shared a man, a dynasty, and a collapse are still living within walking distance of each other. They have had nearly 3 decades to talk, to write it down, to tell someone, but they haven't. And in 2002, a sealed collection of documents was reportedly recovered from Gbadolite before the palace was looted and stripped bare. Personal records, financial ledgers, letters. Those documents have never been fully accounted for. Nobody knows who has them now. Nobody knows what is in them. But the people most likely to know are the same women who have spent 30 years saying absolutely nothing. And silence at that level, for that long, is never accidental. It always means something.